Hello, brothers and sisters. Today is December the 14th, in the year of our Lord, 2021. And today I'll be going over with you an article from Harper's Weekly, dated January 17th, 1874, but it's actually from another paper in Europe. It doesn't say what paper, but back in these days, before the internet and telephones and all that, uh, newspapers would share the news with each other through their newspapers and would send information back and forth. And they would sometimes publish articles from other newspapers in theirs and would allow the other newspapers to do the same to spread information. But I think that you'll find this interesting. Uh, it gets into the Knights Templars and everything later in the article. So we'll go ahead and read her here. It says, Occasional Papers from Europe, number 5. There can be nothing more fresh and verdant than the London parks. Like picturesque fragments of the inland English scenery, they seem to have fallen accidentally into the midst of the toiling city and are wildly luxuriant, as if scarcely touched by the trainer's hand. In Hyde Park there are rambles under the huge oaks and chestnuts as quiet and solitary, rough and neglected, as if they were in a primeval forest. The trees are often pictures, some worn, bruised, and disordered by time, yet huge and powerful, tall and stately, and some beautiful and young, with broad limbs and massive trunks that seem to scorn the flight of years. One sees the generations of men before him and the generations of the forest. It is not in the falling leaves alone that the first of poets and all his successors might read the fate of their race. Nor would any poet or saint disdain to call these fair trees his brethren. Under their shade have swept on the aspiring throngs of court and camp, of all who have forced themselves into a brief or lasting observation in the annals of England, courtiers and poets, soldiers and princes, gay women and men, celebrated at least in the story that records their acts, have shown generation after generation under the oaks of Hyde Park and in the green alleys of St. James. It was in the latter that King Charles II led his disorderly train of satyrs and of furies, of reactionists and conservatives, who hoped to blot out in the wild revels the memory of the Puritan revival. And in Hyde Park, Cromwell had long ago trained the citizens of London to the contest with Belial. In the soft scenery of St. James Swift wandered, meditating wild schemes of ambition, and sighed the next moment for the willows and the pale companion at Larricour. Priors strode swiftly by, and in the faint moonlight each lonely alley teems with the great shades of the past. But the unstudied beauties of the London parks deserve more than a careless notice from our landscape gardeners. What the denizens of a large city require is the contrast of pure nature and an intense, through artificial solitude. The great city abounds in free and perhaps instructive amusements, and immense sums have been lavished in providing galleries of rare pictures and museums of medieval and classical antiquities. It would probably have been wiser if a portion of this large outlay had been expended in the more useful branches of education. But in London, one may wonder almost incessantly amidst the rarest sculptures torn from the ruins of Greek temples and pictures of artists renowned through the ages. The British Museum is laden with the spoils of Ephesus and Athens, Nineveh, and Thebes. Among the most recent of its acquisitions are the discolored fragments of the Mausoleum of Artemisia, a wheel of a gigantic chariot, and an almost complete restoration of one of the enormous horses that crowned the pyramid of Scopas and of Halicarnassus. The statue of the beautiful King Mouses, in whom Artemisia mourned, stands beside his monument, and the devotion of the classic queen may find a parallel in the profuse tributes with which the memory of Prince Albert is perpetuated everywhere in sculpture and architecture through the British realm. The immortality of Scopas, for which alone we are assured by his contemporaries he labored, has been ascertained by the discoveries of Mr. Newton. His breezes, his Melusus, his gigantic steed, and his animated lions might at least excite the envy of a Landseer or a Gibson. Yet if the modern cannot rival the Greeks in the imitative arts, they may surpass them in many that are more useful. Of the autographs of the British Museum, the most ancient are often the most legible. King Edward VI wrote in a clear, round hand. Queen Elizabeth in an imperious calligraphy, and Lady Jane Grey in the soft free letters that rival the purity of a medieval manuscript. By their side is the obscure yet firm and careful handwriting of the purblind Johnson, the sharp outlines of Pope, and the rapid and impenetrable writings of Malachi's hand. It seems that kings and princesses might have won their living as writing masters, where the lords of the pen must have failed. In Kingston Museum, all the wonders of the medieval arts are carefully arranged, and the National Gallery is full of shapes and beauty. Poussins and Claudes, Raphaels and Michelangelos contend on the same walls with misty Turners and graceful Landseers. The British public cannot complain that its government has not exercised a paternal interference in leading it to a study of the beautiful. Wandering through the crowds of London, one often meets a procession of children clothed in antique garb and belonging to some of the numerous charitable establishments that form the boast of the metropolis. Well-meaning citizens, sometimes from a natural liberality, and sometimes from less perfect motives, have filled the city from age to age with liberal endowments for free schools and endless hospitals and asylums. Conservative Londoners value themselves upon the liberality of the past. Over the doors of these institutions is inscribed, supported by voluntary contributions. Boxes are provided in public places in which the charitable may drop a few shillings or pence. Annually, an assembly of charity children is gathered at St. Paul's, where all are excluded who do not wear the badges of their order. The charms of voluntary beneficence are enlarged upon the sermons and lectures, and conservative deans and vicars insist that no city in the world is so benevolent as their own. Recent inquiries, however, have thrown doubt upon these labors of beneficence. Enough money is annually devoted to charity to maintain, one might suppose, all the needy of London, It is stated that more than $30 million are given away each year, but of this immense sum, a large proportion is said to find its way to managers and trustees, and the children of the poor wander neglected and homeless through the streets. The system of voluntary charity in London has wholly failed. The government has at last interposed to open schools for the children of the poor and to correct the abuses that flow from the dishonesty of selfish guardians. From the busy Strand, a narrow gateway opens into one of the most famous of London scenes. In the 12th century, the Knights Templars were renowned through Christendom as the champions of the cross and the succor of needy pilgrims. The mail clad knights clove without scruple and panium host with their sharpest steel and ministered tenderly to the temporal wants of Jerusalem. As they outlived their early rigors, the donations of kings and nobles and the growth of their landed possessions made them enormously rich. Instead of ministering to the poor or crossing lances with the descendants of the foes of Baldwin and Tancred, the Templars built them fair palaces in the peaceful West and lived in an opulent splendor that was said to be attended by the grossest indulgences. Their enemies at least covered the hotly and perhaps guilty knights with ceaseless accusation. A doom fell upon the Templars more dreadful than has ever befallen any monastic order. They were tortured and racked in strange sufferings. Their guilt was declared, their property confiscated in every land. They perished almost in a moment in the midst of their wide alliances and boundless power. In the Temple Church, at the side of the Strand, lie the faint traces of their former magnificence. In the 13th century, the chief seat of the order in England was amidst the soft landscape on the banks of the Thames in the outskirts of London. Their magnificent palaces overlooked the river, and a church, rich with marble and tracery, arose on its banks in imitation of that of the Holy Sepulchre at Jerusalem. It still in part survives. Columns of the rarest marble, rich sculpture, and solemn inscriptions record the grandeur of an order that perished 6 centuries ago. The land and property of the knights came, after some changes, into the hands of the lawyers and law students of the Inns of Court. They have borrowed the name and some of the habits of the Templars. Festivities, masques, and revels have graced the rich banqueting room in the Middle Temple that would have done no discredit to the barbarous splendors of the knightly predecessors. Within its walls, Shakespeare's Twelfth Night was first performed before the riotous audience. The chapel or church has been repaired and embellished at a large expense. The robed lawyers have grown rich by the plunder of the knights of the Temple. Their gardens and their palaces again overlook the modern river, and their various privileges excite the envy of the less fortunate throngs. Under the circular roof of the ancient church lie the effigies of 9 Templars of costly workmanship, their arms and sometimes their legs crossed in memory of the crucifix. Their rich robes and crimson cape, imitated in marble, now blackened with age, and their stony eyes gazing coldly upon their modern spoilers. In his 6 centuries since the originals of the curious group passed away, perhaps in the grove of the temple, in 6 centuries their names are lost in gloom. The walls of the church are covered with inscriptions in honor of famous lawyers, now scarcely better known than the knights, their predecessors. A Plowden and a Bois de Gilbert sleep uselessly side by side, nor does curiosity desire to disturb their repose. But upon one tomb, standing apart in the churchyard of the temple and covered with a mossy stone, is written one of the names that the world will not suffer to be lost. For several years, at the close of his varied career, Oliver Goldsmith was an occupant of one of the chambers of the temple. It has indeed been a constant haunt of literary men. Addison wrote here, on a small table covered with a green cloth and copious blots of ink, now preserved at Holland House, many of his essays. Johnson lived in the temple for 4 years. Burke and Mackintosh, I think, and certainly Macaulay, were tenants of these memorable halls. But Goldsmith alone has found his resting place. He could not have written much that was of real value in the temple. He had made large sums of money, which he squandered lavishly in fine furniture and dress, velvet coats, and deeds of charity. His elegant chambers were the scene of noisy revelry. He grew irrecoverably in debt. His mind might well be ill at ease, yet his life can scarcely be considered unfortunate. When he died, attended by universal love and admiration, the benefactor of endless generations, we gathered a few withered leaves and green moss from the sacred spot. Eugene Lawrence. Well, I thought that was interesting. That's all I have for you guys today. Until next time, God bless.